Welcome to section 7.2, multiplying and dividing rational expressions. The rules for multiplying and dividing are exactly the same ones you used when you learned to multiply and divide fractions to begin with. When you're multiplying fractions, you multiply straight across the top and the bottom. When you multiply fractions, you can reduce your answer at the end, or you can cross cancel before you multiply. And we'll cover both options. Okay? When you are dividing, you change your division to a multiplication and you flip your second fraction. And then once it's a multiplication, you follow the multiplication rules. You may have learned this as keep it, change it, flip it. You keep your first fraction, change it to multiplication, flip your second fraction. You may also have learned ours not to reason why, just invert and multiply. Don't think about it, just flip it and multiply it. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're just going to start multiplying and we'll write all our answers in lowest terms. Okay, first option when you're multiplying, you can multiply straight across the top, straight across the bottom. 36 times 28 is 1008, and then I have the z cubed, and that's over 6 z to the first power times z to the second power is z cubed. Now we reduce this fraction. I have a z cubed in the top and 1 in the bottom, so they go away. I check to see if 1008 is divisible by 6, and it is. And when you do that division, you get 168. The advantage to this method is it's fairly simple. The disadvantage is that you start dealing with really large numbers. So let's look at the other option, which is cross cancellation. Okay, and what we can do is basically we can reduce our fraction before we multiply. You can reduce up and down, and you can reduce on the diagonals. You just cannot reduce straight across. So if I look at this first fraction, I have a 6 in the bottom and a 36 in the top. If I divide this by 6, I get a 1. If I divide this by 6, I get a 6. Now look here. I have a z cubed in the top and a z to the first power in the bottom. We say that this 1 cancels out one of those. So now I have a z squared in the top. Now I'm going to rewrite this because sometimes they get complicated and you want to rewrite them to make sure you don't lose anything. But you can also do this all in one step. So this is where we are right now. I've reduced that one. This one does not reduce. Now let's look on the diagonal. 1 and 28, there's nothing. Here I have a z squared, here I have a z squared. My z squareds can cancel out since they are the same, and that's a 1 now in the bottom. Now I simply do 6 times 28, and I get 168. Okay. Now, when we are multiplying and dividing, we need to have everything as factored as possible before we start doing things. In this case, it's already factored for us. I'm going to look at each individual fraction and see if I can reduce that. Most people find cross cancellation easier. So I'm looking here, and I don't see anything in common. But here, the 6 and the 18, if I divide this by 6, I get a 1. If I divide this by 6, I get a 3. So that helps. Now let's look on the diagonal. On this diagonal, I have a c plus d, which is to the first power. I have a c plus d squared, second power. This one of those cancels out one of these. So I still have 1 in the bottom. This whole thing had to cancel out. It had to cancel out as a unit because it's in parentheses. Now look on this diagonal. I have 3's on each one. So that means I can cancel out the 3's, divide each by 3. That's a 1, and now that's a 1 in the top. So let's go ahead and multiply and see what we have left. I have 2 times 1 over 1 times c plus d. Okay. This can be written without the parentheses in the bottom. Certainly not wrong if you keep them there. It helps you remember that it's a unit. What you do not want to do is to write it like this. Absolutely never ever do that. And the reason is because you can't tell whether the D is meant to be underneath a fraction or if it's supposed to be off to the side. Because this could easily mean this. And that's very different from this. So don't use that kind of fraction at all.